So today we're going to have a look at tax, windfall tax in fact, and we're going to ask the question, does profit mean more money for the public coffers? We're celebrating the fact that we've now had over 100,000 views of our YouTube channel, which has been a milestone we've been looking forward to, and we're reaching our target audience, which is you, the energy companies, the geoscientists, the engineers, the MDs and CEOs, people in the supply chain, the regulators, and various media outlets. So thanks for supporting our channel. We hope to continue bringing you some great videos in the future. You will have seen on the news and in the newspapers headlines similar to this. So BP rakes a quarterly profit of $8.2 billion as oil majors post another round of bumper earnings. Well, a number of companies have had great returns, and that's because energy prices have recently gone up. So we're going to have a look at tax today. To answer our question, does profit mean more for the public coffers to go to the Treasury or the Exchequer? It's got to be realised that most of the revenue that companies like BP make are actually made overseas, and the taxes have been paid overseas. Now, in a similar way, foreign companies who operate in the North Sea, they pay taxes in the UK. They don't necessarily then pay them in their home country. Why shouldn't we celebrate success of British companies, and two in particular, of course, being the two British majors, Shell and BP? We should celebrate these companies. They're still listed in the UK and they employ lots of locals. There's other benefits, despite really a lot of disincentives that government has put their way. And in particular, we're going to come on and talk to the windfall tax. So let's have a look at the companies that are paying taxes. Now, this is a few years old. It's 2015 to 2017. And it comes from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. This is a UK multi-stakeholder group. They refer to this as subsidies. Now, the UK government does not subsidise the oil and gas industries. These are tax allowances. They are legitimate. I'm no accountant, but these are losses brought forward or tax allowances from previous years, or they're recognising the fact that there's ongoing investment by these companies. And anyway, you can see that none of these companies were actually liable to pay any UK taxes over this period of time. These are not subsidies. Now, these tax efficient positions, they do get traded, as they do in any other industry by any other company throughout the UK. There are subsidies that do apply, and if you are interested, have a look at the contract for difference, which is actually applied in other areas of the energy sector. That does strike me as being much closer to a subsidy than anything else that happens in the oil and gas sector. So the government, they've enjoyed billions of dollars of tax revenues over many decades since the North Sea really took off. Now we've got a lot of decommissioning that's needed, and it's part and parcel of the whole life cycle that we have to responsibly remove these platforms, the pipelines, abandon the wells safely, and leave them in a great condition, and actually do all the remedial work that you would hope that would actually return the environment to as near pristine as can be managed. And this work costs billions of dollars, and it's an integral part of developing an oil and gas field. It's well known. So now some of those costs, effectively the taxpayer is not seeing that any revenue coming in, because that work has to be undertaken. So that's part of the reason for the tax allowances. Now, this is simplistic, and I'm sure we'll see in the comments below that somebody will probably try and correct me, and I'll be grateful to them for doing that. Compare the UK and its use of funds. Compare that with what Norway's done. Norway has got an enormous sovereign wealth fund. It has a very high standard of living, so it's been able to use the revenues from its oil and gas very, very effectively. And yet it's a company that not only has a stable taxation system, but it's a very high taxation system. It's sort of 78% marginal tax rate. It's been the same for decades. But the difference is that in Norway, if you haven't got those allowances and you make the investment, then the state will actually cut a check and give a tax rebate in the same fiscal year. So for any company, that's very attractive investment proposition, and it's why Norway sees a lot more activity than the UK sector in the last decade. So here's a press release from BBC, and it's reporting that Total Energies are going to cut their North Sea investments. So in response to the windfall tax. Now, what this article talks about is that the Energy Profits Levy was raised from 25% to 35% in the autumn statement. But I think what's important is that throughout this year, the EPL's gone from 0 to now 35%. So there's been a 35% increase in tax, and it's a very, very specific tax which you can't offset many costs against. And it's going to be in place until March 2028, so a major disincentive for future investment. Now, the government has said that the levy strikes a balance between funding the cost of living while encouraging investment. Well, clearly, Total Energies were not encouraged to invest under the new regime. We did want to try and get a map, a world map that showed Total Energies' activities, really to show that they have operations throughout the planet, right around the globe. And if the UK is putting these tax disincentives in place, then they'll just move overseas and spend the money elsewhere. And all the majors will react similarly. But it's not just the majors. This is a press release 5th of December 2022 from Serica Energy, and the quote is that while we believe in the importance of the UK oil and gas sector, we're now considering opportunities in other countries alongside those in the UK. So it's been a kind of a disincentive for just about anybody and everybody in the oil and gas sector. So let's have a look at the windfall tax. Now, what the windfall tax is, it's there's basically an energy profits levy. It's because oil and gas prices have gone up in the last few months. And so back in May 2022, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was Rishi Sunak, he introduced a 25% tax increase. So tax was at 40%, he moved it up to 65%, and then in November 2022, Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, he moved it up a further 10%, so that now we have in the UK a marginal rate of tax on oil of 75%. Now compare that to the rest of industry, which only pays 30% for whatever commodity, whatever industry you can think of in the UK. The oil and gas companies pay an awful lot more tax. I'm not going to go into any of this, but it's here for information. So pause the video if you want to understand the announcement back on the 26th of May, or here you can have a look at this one, which is the November update to the Energy Profits Levy. So pause the video if you want to see more. The windfall tax is predicted to make billions of dollars for the Treasury. And unlike other taxes, there is no offset of previous losses, of decommissioning costs. So this is really coming straight. It applies just to the production that the oil and gas companies make in the UK. There is a little piece of good news in this. There is an opportunity for oil and gas companies to reinvest in the UK. I think it's quite clever what the government's done here. They've given an opportunity for companies to actually go out, and it costs only 9 cents in the dollar to actually reinvest funds in the UK. Who should reinvest? Well, these are the top oil and gas producers in the UK, and it's data comes from Bloomberg, this particular slide, but it's based on data from Wood Mackenzie. And you can see here that here's Harbour Energy, Total Energies, BP, Shell, Neo, Ithaca, Spirit, Repsol, Sinopec, CNOOC, and Apache, all producing lots and lots of oil. They can opt to pay 100 cents on the dollar to the taxman, or they can reinvest some of that money. And if they reinvest between now and 2020, they only Actually, it only cost them 9 cents in the dollar. So really, everybody should be looking to see if there are any great opportunities to reinvest in. Should companies reinvest? Well, companies are looking and sort of saying, well, what's the guarantees on the long-term taxation level? We've now seen 2 tax increases in a single year in 2022, and these taxes will be in place until 2028. It's a moving feast. Will the tax rate be reduced or removed after that? What will happen if there's a different administration? If Labour get into power, how can business justify billions of dollars of long-term investment, perhaps over decades, if the tax environment keeps changing? And this is what the UK is doing so badly. Compare it with Norway, for example. Very stable. It kind of reminds me of a book I once read where the barn symbolises the memory of a modern nation. I'll leave you to have a look at that. Let's have a look at something else. The consequences of these actions. And here's a headline from the very excellent Energy Voice. And you can see here, oil giant Shell to review £25 billion of spend after windfall tax hike. This is the 22nd of November, 2022. And you can see that, this is a headline that you might expect. And where does this come from? Well, here's some global data energy, and it's their transition module. Okay, I've got that right. So it's a look at the leading oil and gas companies driving the energy transition, and you can see all the companies. You'll recognize the logos down there: Shell, Total Energies, BP, Equinor, ExxonMobil, Repsol, Chevron, Eni, Petrobras, and OMV, the Austrian company. And you can see this is the level of investment that they've made to date. So their current renewable energy capacity in megawatts by pipeline, I think it means future, not actually a physical pipeline. You can see the number of renewable refineries they have, the number of electric vehicle charging points that they currently have and that they're targeting to have by 2025, 2030 or whatever. There is the carbon capture capacity and also the low carbon hydrogen capacity, which they're looking to build. So you can see that a lot of money is also being spent by the oil and gas companies who are moving into the renewables and helping with the energy transition. But when you tax them, where does the money come from? They don't have the money now to reinvest in things like renewables. So, this has all got to be looked at and put into balance. This is just, I'll leave that for you to read. Rishi Sunak, the third UK Prime Minister in a year. Another one of the consequences, this is a graph based on RigLogic's data, and they're part of the Westwood Global Energy Group. And you can see in this graph, what we've done is we've actually taken out the intervening years, and we've just showing 2012 and comparing it with the last 3 years here. And this is the number of rig days that have been used by country. And you can see back in 2012, there was a lot of rig activity in the UK, also in Norway. Now you can see that by 2020, 2021, 2022, there is an overall an upward trend in the amount of rig work that there is. But you can see that within the UK, it really hasn't recovered to anything like the levels of 10 years ago. The expectation is that more rigs are likely to depart the North Sea in 2023. There isn't a lot of work currently. Not a lot of inquiries, not a lot of contracts being drawn up. And the North Sea semi-submersibles, which are the floating drilling rigs, the supply has shrunk by 36%, or 17 rigs have actually left the UK, or they've been decommissioned. Essentially, they've been junked. They've been cut up for scrap metal in some cases. And that's between 2015 and November 2022. The report also goes on to say that, well, the currently rig rates for a harsh environment, mid-water, semi-submersible is upwards of over $300,000 a day to hire. We can look at the supply chain, and this is a piece of work from Northstone Advisors and recently published. And you can see, looking here at 3 companies, Saipem, Subsea 7 and Technip FMC, and you can see that they are showing increased revenue so far this year, or between Q2 and Q3, and this is likely to be an area where there's going to be a great deal of activity. So if things ramp up, it'll be the service sector. It'll be companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker Hughes, Weatherford, all these sorts of companies, along with the ones you see here, who potentially should benefit from increased activity. Now, for more information, there's a contact number for Andrew Reid, and please get in touch with Andrew if you'd like to understand what's been happening in the supply chain. So who should invest or why invest in the UK? Well, the UK has always been considered as a blue chip country. But really, when you look at the volatility of its fiscal regime, then it really isn't that stable. We've had 2 changes within the last 6 months, and that's really, really worrying and difficult to do business in such an environment. There are great opportunities. Now, the 33rd licensing round is coming up. It's due to close on the 12th of January in 2023. The UK's got to face up that regulation and costs, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of regulation, new compliance, environmental obligations which have got to be addressed, and costs have skyrocketed for oil companies who are trying to do anything. In fact, not just oil companies, gas companies, energy companies, wind companies, everything is going up. And of course, the windfall tax is actually being applied to offshore wind companies as well. If you've been following our video channel and seen some of the recent activity overseas, you can see that there are some fantastic opportunities for these international oil companies to basically go and invest in areas where they can find major reserves and perhaps spread the political risk and certainly the tax risk. These are for majors with lots of money, and I say that because the cost of drilling an ultra deep water well can be measured in hundreds of millions of dollars just for a single well. Now, some of the majors are also, as we've said earlier, investing billions in renewables. Now, this is where the mid caps and the small cap companies, they're kind of stuck. They can't get into that game. It's too expensive. They can't put all of their investment into a single deep water well. So they've kind of muddle on and do the best they can. Let's kind of have a look now at the USA. Here we've got the global politics arena. In the USA, you pay 21% federal corporate income tax. Now, that's every company, not just the oil and gas companies, every company. Now, there are some local variations. So within some states, they can charge somewhere between 1 and 12%. But basically, all companies are pretty much treated equally. This contrasts with the UK, where the oil and gas companies are now got a marginal rate of tax, which is double what other industries are paying. So let's have a look at production here from 1965 to 2020 in the US, and you can see that oil production peaked around about 1970, 1980. All this data is from the BP Statistical Review, which we hope is going to continue. Some talk that it might be discontinued, but it's a fantastic publication, and we certainly support and look forward to it continuing. And you can see that after this decline, what happened? Well, what happened was there was one of the biggest production inclines that I've ever seen, and there's been a huge amount of oil being added here in the last decade within the US, and this is all down to essentially fracking. In fact, the US has gone from being a net importer of oil and gas and is now a net exporter, certainly of LNG and LPG. It's really helping its balance of payments and growing that economy. Let's have a reality check. Yes, most energy used comes from fossil fuels, and globally even a lot of the electricity is generated via fossil fuels. So we do think that we've got to grow the renewables, and it's really it says here for the rich people who can afford it. Well, not all nations can afford the billions of dollars to invest in wind farms, in solar farms, etc., but there are certainly the first world countries. They can, although within those countries, I think not everybody is in a position to carry on paying. But if you don't produce your local fossil fuels, which is, if you have them, great, produce them. But if you decide not to do that because you think we should really just abandon everything and go over to green and renewable resources, well, the options left for you are to import. Now, there are some implications with importing, or some consequences of importing. One is security of supply. Now, look at Europe. Look what's happened with Russia invading Ukraine. And let's look and see what happens when winter really bites. Can Europe supply all of its population with the heat and light to get through the winter? We shall see. Balance of payments. Now, if you're paying just to get oil and gas, or and it's all down to the consumption of the country. But if you're having to pay to get oil tankers to come in, to actually get LNG ships to come and dock and offload in your ports, then there's no tax revenue, there are no jobs, and your economy is going to go to rat shit. Well, higher carbon emissions, that's another consequence of importing, because on top of the very emissions associated with the oil and gas, now you're having to add transportation costs. So the numbers actually go up, not down. It makes no sense. I've been trying to think of some positives of importing, but I really can't. If you can think of any, please put them in the comments below. How does the government deal with this? Well, of course, we have leadership, and this diagram here, I'll just roll it out. It kind of shows you that we've gone from the Department of Energy right over to the Department of Trade and Industry, to we had a Secretary of States for Business, Enterprise and Regulatory Reform, who then became DEC, which was the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And then in 2016, the department was abolished, and it was then kind of put into BEIS, which is the Business, Energy and Industry. Oh, goodness me. There we go. There's the regulator, introduced in 2016 and still going. Well, they changed the name back in March of 2022. Now known as the North Sea Transition Authority. There we are. I don't even know where that lot fit in. Anyway, 1974 to 2022, I've had a kind of scout around these, and I think there's been somewhere in the region of 21 secretaries of state responsible for oil and gas. So on average, they're lasting a little over 2.3 years. There've been 7, is it, or 8 changes of organizational structure in that time frame. Again, just no stability. It's very difficult for business to invest when the government policy is changing at the rate it does, and it doesn't need to do that. There are other ways. So what are the key takeaways from our TROVE views? Now, we've shown you the data. It's there for interpretation. You've heard my interpretation, but let's have a look. Tax is inevitable. Yeah, we know that, and it's complex for sure. What you see is not necessarily what you get. So when the public see the BBC talking about these obscene levels of profit that these oil and gas companies are making, of course people think, well, hang on a minute, they should be paying more. But realise that they don't pay it to the UK government. They've paid it overseas. There's very, very little tax that is going to be due to the UK from the profits they've made. Well done. And of course, within the UK, companies are probably investing more already than they're actually producing from within the UK. So there isn't any tax coming into the UK in some circumstances. The windfall tax will cause some very bizarre reactionary behaviours. So, as stated, it is being encouraged by government for oil and gas companies to reinvest some of the money, and it's to be commended. It's a very good policy. However, for years and years, the supply chain has been whittled down, and it really doesn't have the capacity to meet the demand. Can they ramp up? Well, we shall see. Oil and gas companies, they'll be rubbing their hands. I mean, this is a great opportunity for reinvestment. But, with a long-term 75% marginal tax rate, some companies will just look overseas. It really does need to have some long-term commitment and long-term thinking from politicians. Now, the UK has become one of the least fiscally stable countries on the planet. And, well, at the end of the day, it's the politicians that we end up electing. They tend not to be business and technical experts. Very few of them even have a degree. I've forgotten the number. A few years ago, it was less than 10 MPs out of the 600 plus actually had a science degree. That's scary. If you would like to read further, there is an article I'd recommend. There's the link to it, and it's a very interesting and well-written article, and thanks to Alan Foom for pointing that one out. Future topics, well, we're going to look at why are brokers always so positive? If you're an investor, all you ever read is the great news that the brokers always tell you. It's what they don't tell you, which we try and look to. Competent persons reports, they are significant within our industry, and what don't they say? Despite all the safeguards, there is a lot of hype that's aimed at these sort of retail investors, and we're going to have a look at some of those. Working petroleum system, now that's a bit technical here, but it's a very popular term. What does it actually mean? Why most investors don't understand risk. And within the industry, we use risk and we know what it means, but it doesn't translate to non-technical folks. So perhaps we'll try and cast some light on that. Some generic advice for investors and gamblers alike. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell to be advised when the next video is out. And we look forward to having you back on our channel before too long.